What's up everyone, Darcblade here with another Hunter's Guide to Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. In this video, we'll be bringing you another endgame build, this time for the longsword. Now what is an endgame build? Well, it's a build that is constructed from the rarest armor, weaponry, and decorations in the game. They also feature curious crafting, although they're not normally to the extent where every single piece of armor in a build features the absolute rarest of rare augmentations. Now, as always, if you find these videos helpful, informative, or even entertaining, please consider leaving a like on the video, as well as subscribing to the channel, as I try to bring you various builds for a variety of different playstyles. Now, when it comes to the longsword in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, it's a very powerful weapon. Thanks to an arsenal of counter-attack mechanics, builds with the longsword are normally able to forego defensive skills, as you're able to counter monster attacks, preventing any damage to your hunter. This allows a lot of longsword builds to focus entirely on DPS. However, a few defensive skills are welcome, and when it comes to the longsword, it does benefit from a lot of quality of life skills. And so with that, I present to you the comfy Frostcraft build. This is a relatively straightforward longsword build that utilizes damage output and quality of life. It does have one or two defensive skills as well that allow you to take on hunts quite comfortably. It may not have the absolute highest DPS a longsword build can achieve, but it is still powerful enough to bring down monsters in a relatively quick time. So for the comfy Frostcraft build, you'll need the following. First of all, you'll need the Risen Kushala Glare, then the Tempest Robes, Tempest Sleeve, Rime Guard Coil, and the Tempest Hakama. For your Petalace, I'm using the Absolute Petalace for extra health. You could swap this out for the Demon Petalace if you wanted to for more damage. And then for your Talisman, this is where things become a little bit tricky. I'm using the Talisman with a point in Frostcraft and a point in Wind Mantle and a tier 4 decoration slot upgrade. As for my weapon, I'm using the Silver Severa, which is the Primordial Malzeno longsword. The main reason we're taking this is primarily because of the decoration slots it has available to it. It also has decent raw attack as well, and sharpness to be fair. As for the actual augmentations on the weapon, I've simply gone for increasing the weapon's attack rating, with the remaining points being used to increase the elemental rating of the weapon. So when it comes to the decorations, you've got a lot to play around with. So first of all, I've gone for attack jewels to max out attack boost. For the rampage slots, I've gone for a wire bug jewel to allow us to hold additional wire bugs for longer periods of time. You can replace this if you wanted to with one of the anti-species decorations. I've then gone for tenderizer jewels to max out weakness exploit, a shockproof jewel for a point in the shock absorber skill. This could be considered optional, and you could drop this if you play solo entirely. I've then gone for expert jewels to max out critical eye, sheave jewels to max out quick sheave, intrepid jewel for a point in intrepid heart, wirebug jewel to max out wirebug whisperer. I've then gone for hard steadfast jewels to max out stun resistance, jumping jewels to max out evade extender, and then a redirection jewel to max out the redirection skill. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with a raw attack of 430 with a dragon rating of 73. You have a decent chunk of purple sharpness with 40% base affinity. This can be 90% when you take into account weakness exploit. You also have a strong defense of 1015 that is strong against ice, neutral against water, but unfortunately weak to the other elements, especially dragon and fire. As for the switch skills, these are kinda down to personal preference when it comes to the longsword, in all honesty, as this build works with any combination of switch skills. I personally like to use the Silkbind Sakura Slash and the Sacred Sheave combo on one scroll, whilst using the Special Sheave combo and the Soaring Kick on the other scroll. But like I said, the choice is down to you. Now, when it comes to the skills, first of all you have attack boost at level 7, increasing the raw attack of a build, and at level 4 or above grants us a percentage bonus to that raw attack. If you still haven't got to the absolute endgame yet, attack boost may be slightly lower level than what is shown here, but you should still be able to produce similar results. You'll then have critical eye at level 7, increasing the base affinity of this build. Again, depending on how far you are through the game, this may be slightly lower, but it shouldn't be too detrimental to the build. Next up is Critical Boost at level 3, a skill which increases the damage of our attacks whenever they crit a monster, but only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental or element portion. You'll then have Weakness Exploit at level 3, a skill that when we're attacking monster weak points will increase our affinity by up to 50% at level 3. You'll then have Quick Sheave at level 3, a skill which allows us to sheave our weapon more quickly. This applies to how we normally sheave weapons, but also in the case of the longsword, how quickly we sheave our weapon when performing the Sacred Sheave combo or the Special Sheave combo. You'll then have Evade Extender at level 3, which to be honest is kind of optional, although to be honest, Evade Extender at level 1 is advisable for absolutely every single build in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. It basically increases the distance at which we dodge and evade. And whilst not being necessarily needed for the longsword thanks to the counter attacks, Evade Extender allows us to hop after monsters when performing the Sacred Sheath combo. You'll then have Stun Resistance at level 3, a wonderful quality of life skill for any build as it prevents all stun effects on our hunter, and monsters are able to stun you quite easily in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, so Stun Resistance is definitely a community favourite. You'll then have Wirebug Whisperer at level 3, a skill which allows us to hold additional wirebugs for longer periods of time, and on top of that increases the recovery rate of wirebugs too. Now Wirebug Whisperer at level 3 coupled with the next skill, Wind Mantle at level 3, which is a skill that when using a Silkbind attack, it boosts our wirebug recovery gauge, turning it green. Landing continuous attacks on the monster will also increase this effect. But what is the effect? Well, once the wirebugs are green, it basically boosts the recovery speed of wirebugs, allowing us to use our Silkbind attacks more frequently. Now unfortunately the Wind Mantle effect does dissipate whenever we sheathe our weapon, but it doesn't apply to the Sacred Sheath or the Special Sheath, so we can use these to keep the Wind Mantle effect going. Anyway, you'll then have Frostcraft at level 3, which is the namesake of this build. Frostcraft is a skill that gives us another gauge underneath our stamina bar next to our sharpness bar. This represents an aura of frost that builds up around our weapon whenever it's sheathed. Again, this does include the Sacred Sheath and Special Sheath, to which this gauge fills up, increasing our raw attack. But every time we hit a monster with a melee attack, the gauge will deplete until we sheathe our weapon again. But as you can see, the longsword has natural sheathing mechanics in its rotation, allowing it to greatly make use of the Frostcraft skill, enhancing any longsword's DPS. Anyway, you'll then have Heaven Sent at level 3, a wonderful quality of life and defensive skill. Basically, when we've been fighting a large monster for a set amount of time, without taking damage, a whirlwind effect will form around our hunter. This will give our hunter various benefits. Whilst Heaven Sent is in effect, the damage taken will be severely reduced. On top of that, whilst Heaven Sent is in effect, when switching between scrolls, it will allow us to recover sharpness, and at level 3, once it's in effect, it will prevent any sharpness loss whatsoever. So it's a nice skill to manage our sharpness and provide us some damage resistance. Anyway, you'll then have Focus at level 2, which kind of is a byproduct of the armor we're using, but it is still useful to some respect when you like to utilize the Sacred Sheath combo, as it allows us to charge up that move faster. You'll then have Redirection at level 2, a skill that when you perfectly perform a skill scroll swap, it nullifies the damage taken, and on top of that, recovers our wirebug gauges. To be honest, it's a risky skill to use, and you could drop it if you wanted to, but again, we've taken it mainly as another skill to allow us to use our wirebugs more frequently. You'll then have Intrepid Heart at level 1, a wonderful defensive skill that gives us additional bar above our health bar. This bar will gradually fill up blue as we land attacks on a monster, to which when it's full, Intrepid Heart will kick in. To which, should we take a hit from a monster that would knock us back, that hit is completely ignored, as in the damage reaction is ignored, and we take reduced damage. This also allows us to keep the Heaven Sent bonus active for longer periods of time. Unfortunately though, the Heaven Sent buff is lost once we take a hit from a monster. And then finally you have Shock Absorber at level 1, which is an optional skill. To be honest, if you're playing solo you don't really need this skill, but the longsword is notorious for tripping up our fellow hunters, and Shock Absorber will basically prevent this whatsoever when you're playing in a group. So those are all the skills to this comfy Frostcraft longsword build. Let's move on to the next section where we talk about the Curious Crafting. Now this is an endgame build, so it's going to feature Curious Crafting. But with this build, the Curious Crafting isn't exactly the rarest of the rare, to be honest. So for the Risen Kushal Glare, I've got an additional point in the Wind Mantle skill and a reduction in the Wirebug Whisperer skill. For the Tempest Robes, I got a tier 2 decoration slot upgrade. For the Tempest Sleeves, I got a point in Weakness exploit and a reduction in the Latent Power skill. For the Rime Guard Coil, I've got an additional point in Frostcraft and a reduction in the Focus skill. And then for the Tempest Hakama, I've got a point in the Evade Extender skill. So they're not the rarest of skills featured on this build. And to be honest, in some respects, as I mentioned at the start, the Talisman is a little bit tricky as it has both Frostcraft and Wind Mantle on it. You could potentially get one of these skills in the Curious Crafting form if you're not able to get a similar Talisman. But of course, every build out there has various pros and cons. No build is absolutely perfect. When it comes to the comfy Frostcraft build, its biggest pro is its quality of life skills, providing you tons of skills that make a hunt feel easier than it maybe is. On top of that, the next pro is this build's damage output. Whilst maybe not the fastest or the highest damage output a longsword build can achieve, it's still able to take down monsters in a relatively quick time, especially if they're weak to the dragon element. And the final pro is that this build doesn't have to worry about sharpness loss whatsoever thanks to Heaven Sent. Even if we do dip down in sharpness, Heaven Sent and switching between the skulls will quickly allow us to replenish that sharpness mid-fight. But of course there are cons. One of the biggest cons for this build is trying to maintain that Frostcraft gauge. You need it to be as high as possible to deal as much damage as possible. And sometimes that's trickier than it may seem, especially when you're trying to keep the Frostcraft gauge as well as keeping the Wind Mantle buff in effect. And the final pro for this build is, unfortunately, it does use some of the rarer decorations in the game, such as the double attack boost and double critical eye jewels. You can still make something similar if you don't have access to these yet, but nonetheless this is a con regardless. But if you're looking for a longsword build to use, one that isn't reliant on health drain skills or other risky playstyles, then I'd recommend this one. It does provide you a ton of quality of life, such as Heaven Sent to manage your sharpness, quick sheath so you can sheath your weapon quicker, evade extender, stun resistance, Wirebug Whisperer, wind mantles, so on and so forth. It provides all these quality of life skills coupled with decent DPS thanks to attack boost, critical eye, crit boost, weakness exploit, and especially Frostcraft, and should allow you to take on all the content in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you another endgame build, this time for the longsword in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.